Hello, everyone. My name is Nina Oslu-Tunjli, and I am the Chief Counsel of Government and Public Affairs with Americans for the Arts and the Executive Director of the Americans for the Arts Action Fund. Next slide, please. I wanted to welcome all of you. We have over 1,000 people registered for our very first webinar of the year, and I'd like to go over some of the things that we'll be doing this year. Next slide. So today's our Advocacy 101 webinar. This is going to be the first in a full series of webinars that we'll be doing this year to get you really educated, ready to take action on key congressional issues that will be happening throughout the year, giving you the right timing and the right messaging for the right opportunity. The other upcoming webinars that we'll be having is coming up in 2 weeks. There's going to be one about earmarks. If you don't know what earmarks are, or if you're interested in trying to get a congressional earmark, this is the webinar for you on February 9th. We'll be sending out marketing materials to register later this week. And then we'll have an Advocacy 201 webinar in April. We're going to have something brand new that we've never done before, and that's a National Arts Advocacy Zoom and call-in week. It's going to replace having to come to Washington on a single day and doing it over a 1-week period when Congress is in session in May. And then we're going to do an Advocacy 301 webinar, continuing to build on our knowledge, current political events, legislative activity going on in July, Advocacy 401 in September, and then finally we'll do a post-election impact webinar in November of 2004. So stay tuned for all of those. Next slide, please. So for today's agenda, we're going to start with opening remarks from the Americans for the Arts President and CEO, Nolan Bivens. Then I'll join Tushar Swain, our Director of Public Policy, on a federal legislation overview. And then Tushar will lead a panel with some key congressional staff, Evan Johnston from Congresswoman Shelley Pingree's office, who is the chair of the Congressional Arts Caucus, and Jesse Eilman of Senator Brian Schatz's office, Senator of Hawaii. After that, Jay Dick is going to go over a series of slides on advocacy tips and strategies. And then I will lead a panel discussion with 3 of Americans for the Arts state and district federal advocacy captains, Manny Kowalling of Washington State, Adrian Jefferson of New Haven, Connecticut, and Chris Kiley of Texas. And then finally, it's a time for all of you to ask us questions, which will happen at the end of the program. Next slide, please. And in terms of how you ask those questions, there's a Q&A box on your screen. And if you can't find it, you can text Mital in the chat, and she might be able to help you find that. The entire webinar is going to go approximately 90 minutes, ending at around 4:30 p.m. Eastern time. And so we're reserving about 15 minutes, as close as we can get to 15 minutes in the Q&A box. Any questions we don't get to, we'll create an FAQ and post on the resource page for this webinar afterwards. Be sure to upvote any question that you see already asked, and that will help get it to the top of the list. So when we answer those questions, we're going to pick from the most popular. Next slide, please. So with that, I'd like to introduce and bring on stage, virtual stage, Nolan Bivens with Americans for the Arts. Nolan.
Good afternoon. I hope I'm transmitting, Nita. It's good. First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone who's joined us here today, and thank you for participating in this first of our webinars. You know, at American for the Arts, we have one simple idea, and that is we want to make sure every American has the opportunity to experience the arts, and really for a lifetime. And so we think in order to do that, advocacy at the federal level is the core thing that we do. And congressional engagement is certainly a core part of that advocacy that we do at the federal level. And so I want to thank you for being that. We also think of the arts as a national asset. And because it's a national asset, we want to make sure that everyone is equitably represented in the funding and resourcing that our nation has for that. And it certainly starts at the national level in that regard. I'd like to highlight that today's program will feature Americans for the Arts Government Affairs, as Nina introduced the session to us today. but it's also going to have arts sector individuals' involvement, federal legislatures, and others. All of these individuals are critical to an effective advocacy program, which is one of the other core things that we offer and want to contribute to this particular sector and its advancement. Americans for the Arts will conduct these year-round fly-ins as we talk about them, but education and cultural awareness of what we're doing is so important for those that we serve in the field. Local arts agencies are critical to this component, and we think of them very oftentimes as the grassroots of our advocacy at the federal level. We don't have a message without the work and hard work that's being done at the local level of our local arts agencies. And so we're so important and happy to have everyone on the call today. I will not go into the details of the agenda as Nina has already given that to you, but you'll hear a lot of folks speaking from a lot of agencies today. And I'm really, really excited that you're here with us. Thank you for your time. We really do appreciate it and enjoy our first webinar. Thank you again.
Thank you, Nolan. We are now going to jump into the federal legislation overview. So I'm going to ask my colleague, Tushar Swain, to join us. And we are going to kind of do this together. What we're going to first do is I'm going to give a legislative and political landscape overview. And if we could go to the next slide. So I just want to go over some key details. And one thing I want to reassure you for, because you see a lot of content here, is this entire slideshow is already up on our resource page. So you don't have to worry about copying down URLs really fast or trying to catch every word we're saying. So be assured of that. And I'm going to give you that URL on the last page. So we are in a very unusual situation in that we are dealing with 2 fiscal year appropriation cycles at the same time. Typically, by January of any given year, we have completed the fiscal appropriations for the previous year. The other thing is that the federal government runs on a special appropriation cycle, a fiscal year, and that is from October 1 until September 30th. So if you can believe it, the current appropriation cycle that has still not been resolved started on October 1st, 2023. So we're already 4 months into the appropriation cycle, and these agencies still don't know what their final appropriations is going to be. So what happens is the federal government's been running on something called a continuing resolution. And it recently just got passed again to move the deadline further down. And now the deadline isn't going to be until March 1st for a certain number that Tushar will go into, and March 8th. So you can imagine it's like 5.5 months already into the current fiscal year that you're operating in, and you're still not going to know whether you're going to get a cut, you're going to get an increase, it's going to be level funding. For now, a continuing resolution means level funding from the previous year, but that is not the final number. At one point in the last 6 months, they may have to cut funding because it's less than level funding. So it's really unusual. The second thing is that in January of 2024, the month we're in, we're going to actually begin the process of working on next year's fiscal year appropriations, which is what would typically happen. And that fiscal year is called FY 2025. And I'll have a slide in a moment to go into more detail about that. But I want to just let you know how odd that is. And as a result, you're going to be getting legislative action alerts from us in the coming weeks and months regarding still trying to finalize FY24 appropriations, while within the same week, we might be sending out an action alert about setting the funding level for FY25. So please bear with us. It's a problem that's been created by Congress, not us. But now you know that that is the problem. The other thing that's a problem is, and what's causing these delays, is that the House, while controlled by Republicans by a fairly narrow margin, about 5 or 6 people, they are doing a lot of infighting. And a small, maybe 1 to 2 dozen Freedom Caucus members are blocking legislation from moving forward and getting finalized. And so as a result, any bills that are finally making it, like a continuing resolution or ultimately these appropriation bills, it's not by a majority Republican. They have to combine with Democrats helping them out to get legislation passed and bypass the Freedom Caucus. As a result, the Freedom Caucus doesn't like that. And that's why the speakership of the House is constantly in jeopardy and being threatened of being unseated, just like the previous speaker, because they're being bypassed. So there are a lot of political problems on the House side. On the Senate side, while the control by Democrats on the Senate is even narrower than what's in this on the House side, they are actually operating in a very bipartisan manner. And bills are coming out of committee almost unanimously endorsed by both Republicans and Democrats. So that's a positive thing. But eventually the House and the Senate have to agree, and the White House has to agree in order to get these bills enacted. And that is a big uphill battle. In terms of things that might be still happening and in play that's carried over from last year is there is momentum moving for a possible tax package. And that's usually to win over votes in order to get these appropriation bills passed. So you might be hearing that there might be a good extension of the child tax credit. Simultaneously, Tushar is working very hard on a bill to get the charitable tax deduction on the front page of even non-itemizers tax forms, so that it's available to 100% of American taxpayers instead of those who only itemize. And it will create an incentive for more charitable giving, hopefully. Another thing that's happening are there are appropriation bills, and there are 12 of them that happen every year, but there are also something called authorizing bills, which are policy changes to the way the federal government operates its programs. It could be an example that many of you might know is the National Endowment for the Arts. 40% of funding for NEA money is given and distributed by state arts agencies. That's a policy issue that's added to an appropriations bill. But sometimes these kinds of authorizing policy changes are standalone bills. And Tushar is going to go through some of those in a moment. I already mentioned that we're going to be dealing with the FY appropriations bill simultaneously. But what is in the back of every elected official's mind at this moment is that this is an election year. We are seeing record number of incumbent members deciding to retire and not run for reelection, but the great majority of them will run for reelection. And so on their mind is winning over voters based on either legislation passed or legislation prevented from passing, depending on what party you're with and how that legislator views those issues. So that's a big issue going into the election. Another thing is it's going to be a shorter legislative cycle. For instance, the month of October, the Congress will not be in session at all leading up to the election on November 5th, because they want to be back home campaigning instead of in DC fighting. And today is the New Hampshire primary, and another big decision might happen. There might be a chance Donald Trump actually wraps up his nomination for the GOP president candidacy. So a lot is happening, a lot at stake this election year, with such sliver controls in the House, the Senate, and polling on the White House for the next president. Everything's on the table, and it can sway one way or another. A lot's going to happen this year. Next slide, please. I mentioned 2 appropriation cycles happening at the same time. On the left side is the carryover. We call it FY24. We know that we're in year 2024 because the cycle's already begun, but the legislation hasn't been completed. Tushar is going to go into where some of the numbers are, but we're looking at early March as for Congress to finally complete these bills because they missed their deadline in January. So if they don't do it, it's going to be another government shutdown possibility, or they're going to combine these 12 appropriation bills into a larger package. An omnibus would be all 12 at the same time. A minibus would be packages of 2 or 3 in each package passing, so it has a better chance of winning over. And what's looming above all this is when that debt ceiling deal was made in spring of 2023, one of the deals that was made is that there would be an automatic rescission if the appropriation bills were not passed and signed into law by April 30th. So that's also looming, that if they don't complete their work in March, and God forbid it goes into April, past April 30th, there are going to be automatic rescissions to that level funding that was set. And then for FY25, things are starting a little bit later. The president is giving his State of the Union on March 7th. Be sure to watch that to see what his policy objectives are for the coming year. He won't release his budget until after the State of the Union sometime. It could be days or it could be a couple weeks. So we're thinking sometime in March. As a result, we will not have what our number is of what we're asking for FY25 for some of these appropriations like NEA until we see the president's budget request. And then other non-appropriation bills like defense will have to get budget allocations from Congress, because they will be very different from the ones that the president sets in his budget request. And then the bills will get marked up in committee, subcommittee, full committee, floor votes. And it'll happen throughout the year. And we'll have those webinars coinciding with those times so that you are ahead of the ask and before those actions are taken. I'm now going to hand it over to Tushar to actually go deep on these issues. Tushar.
Thanks, Nina. And just as an FYI, we are, if you could go to the next slide, Morgan, please. We will definitely be going into much deeper dives on both the appropriations in terms of the policies and the funding during Advocacy 201. I'm going to give you just a brief overview, and then also just to let you know, there are links to the pieces of legislation that we talk about on the slides, as well as on our resource center. So if you want a deeper dive into these issues after the webinar, they are available there for you. But as Nina mentioned, we are still in the midst of the FY24 appropriations process, and that is the focus right now on Capitol Hill. 4 appropriations bills are set to expire on March 1st. Top of mind to us in that first tranche of 4 is the MILCON Military Construction Veterans Affairs Appropriations Bill. We are monitoring and advocating for community arts engagement within the Department of Veterans Affairs. Then the remaining 8 appropriations bills are set to expire on March 8th, and we are monitoring 4 bills there: labor, HHS, education, for well-rounded funding, which includes arts education, Department of Defense funding. We're monitoring community arts engagement for active military within the Department of Defense. Also, the State Department appropriations bill. There was an amendment in the House bill that stripped funding within the State Department's Arts and Embassies program. We're trying to work with the Senate to restore that funding in their bill, and then in a final bill. And then finally, of course, NEA, NEH funding, which is found in the Interior Appropriations Bill. Next slide, please. Thank you. So again, we won't delve deep into the policies. You will have access to those in the Resource Center. But just know that we are advocating right now for $207 million for FY24 for the NEA and the NEH. That would be level funding. We think that this would be a huge win in the political climate that we're in. I talked a little bit about community arts engagement funding for veterans and for active military within the Department of Defense. We're advocating for $10 million for each there. And then within the labor HHS education bill, we're advocating for increases in Titles I, Title II, and Title IV of the Every Student Succeeds Act to support a well-rounded education. The House actually cut Title I funding, which is funding for schools in low-income areas, at 80%, an 80% cut. So we are working to advocate for numbers that are closer to what the Senate has. And then I talked a little bit about arts and embassies funding, hoping to restore that on the Senate side. Next slide, please. Thank you. I want to just briefly mention the NEA and NEH House floor vote. This was a big victory for the arts community. 100% of Democrats voted against 2 amendments introduced by Scott Perry, who was chair of the Freedom Caucus at the time. One amendment would have eliminated NEA funding. The other would have eliminated NEH funding. But again, that was soundly defeated with nearly 40% of Republicans voting against both measures to make that a bipartisan declaration that Congress supports the arts and culture. We bring this up because one, it's a great win for arts advocates who were calling members' offices, taking part in advocacy campaigns to make sure that these were defeated. Also, this is a tangible vote that you can see how your member of Congress voted and see where they are on arts funding by clicking on the link, on the 2 links. And then finally, we anticipate that this could very likely come up with an FY25 funding. So just good to know, to be aware of that. We're going to likely need to advocate again for similar amendments or against similar amendments in the future. Next slide. And so Nina talked about, at least for the first quarter, a parallel approach. We just talked about FY24 appropriations. Appropriations for FY25 will kick off with the State of the Union address to be delivered on March 7th by President Biden to Congress, giving a vision, giving his policy vision for the upcoming year. His budget is expected to be sent to Congress mid to late March. Again, that would be adding numbers to that vision. And that president's request will help inform advocate requests. What will advocates advocate for FY25 funding? We'll take a look at what the president's budget request and make some recommendations to the arts community based on that. Things such as dear colleagues and appropriations or an advocate requests to member of Congress become very important during that time. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in upcoming advocacy trainings. And then from there, that's where Congress begins to kind of take a more drilled down approach, where they start with defense and non-defense top lines, drill down a bit more to top lines for the 12 appropriations bills, then drill down even more by drafting legislation, marking up that legislation, and then trying to pass that through subcommittees, full committee, floor vote. We just mentioned one as it pertains to the NEA, but also for a full appropriations vote. And then if we can get there, to reconcile any House and Senate differences between the 2 bills. Next slide. And so that was the appropriation side, and Nina spent a little bit of time talking about appropriations and authorizations. This is policies. that we hope to help advocate for, to enact into law to help the arts community. 4 bills here. The Creative Workforce Investment Act was just recently introduced by Representative Leger-Fernandez, which would provide a grant program through the Department of Labor for independent artists as well as small arts businesses. The CREATE Act will do something similar, but we'll actually get into some details on that on our next panel. Nina mentioned the Charitable Act and a potential prospect of trying to get this into the into any type of tax bill that might move over the course of the next month. This would reinstate the charitable deduction for non-itemizers, and we all know the importance of charitable giving for the arts community. So this is something that is a top issue for us. And then the Performing Artists Tax Parity Act, which updates the performing artist deduction from 1986 levels, which sorely needs updated. Again, you can find more information on the resource guide on these, as well as by clicking on those links. That will take you right to the bill. You can read the bill. You can see whether your member of Congress has co-sponsored or not. Next slide. And then just quickly, some cultural education issues. Advancing equity in arts and humanities, introduced by Representative Barbara Lee, which addresses inequity in the arts and humanities by providing NEA funding to BIPOC-led organizations. Representative Alma Adams has introduced the HBCU Arts Act, which directs financial assistance and resources for arts and arts education programs at HBCUs. The STAR Act has been reintroduced by Representative Adams and now has a Senate companion introduced by Mazie Hirono, which would lift the ban of federal funds to be used on transit projects. And then the Arts Education for All Act, introduced by Representative Suzanne Bonamici, which is the most comprehensive bill as it pertains to arts education ever introduced. Next slide. And then 2 other just very quick overviews. The Fans First Act is a comprehensive bill that addresses flaws in the secondary market, tries to increase transparency as it pertains to ticket sales and protecting consumers from fake overpriced tickets, as well as having an enforcement component to it. We're also supporting the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act of 2023, which provides processes to review new voting procedures proposed by state and local governments. Next slide. And so these key congressional committees hold jurisdiction over most of the pieces of legislation that I just talked about. I think a good use of this slide would be to, after the webinar, click on the relevant links, see if your member of Congress sits on that committee. And if they did, it'd be a nice way to begin engaging with your member of Congress to support one of the pieces of legislation that I talked about earlier. Next slide. And then 2 calls for action that we have. Endorsements for the Creative Workforce Investment Act. Representative Leger-Fernandez is still looking for more endorsements. We'll be doing something similar with the CREATE Act at the end of the month, but this is for the Creative Workforce Investment Act. Just simply click on that link and you will be able to add your endorsing organization. And then the bottom link is to email your congressional members to support NEA and NEH funding in the final FY24 appropriations bill. So we hope that you take advantage of those as well. Next slide, please. And with that, we're going to change course a little bit here. At the core of our advocacy efforts are building relationships with congressional staff. The more than 17,000 congressional staffers working in the House and the Senate draft laws. They help constituents navigate the complexities of the federal government and ensure that their bosses have the information and knowledge that they need to represent the diverse interests of the public. We have two of the best here today joining us. First is Evan Johnston, Legislative Director for Representative Shelley Pingree, who represents Maine's 1st District, as well as Jesse Eilman, who is General Counsel for Senator Brian Schatz, two great champions in Congress.
Thanks, Tushar.
Hi, Bo. How are you? Hi, Jesse. How are you?
Hey.
Good to see you.
You as well.
Great. Well, again, this segment is really just to learn about best practices that you've seen in terms of advocacy as constituents and advocates reach out to you. But before we start, I wanted to, Evan, we can start with you, just to give us a little bit of background about yourself, how you came into your current role, and your favorite art form and or how the arts have impacted your life.
Curveball question, Tushar. Thank you. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Evan Johnston. As Tushar said, I'm the Legislative Director for Congresswoman Shelley Pingree from Maine's 1st District. I've been with Shelley for 9 years now. I'm originally from the district, so that's sort of what got me into her office. And she's been a great boss, and it's been very encouraging of me kind of moving up the ladder. I've been working on arts policy issues since 2016, and my boss has been the co-chair of the House Arts Caucus since 2018. So I've had the great pleasure of working with folks at AFTA and other arts stakeholders and meeting, I'm sure, many of you along the way. So looking forward to being helpful.
Thanks, Evan. And Jesse, same question for you. If you could just give us a little bit about your background, how you came into your current role, and if you have a favorite art form or how the arts have impacted you.
Yeah, so I've been with Senator Schatz's office for about 6 years now in a variety of roles, but I've come in from the start working on kind of arts and creative economy issues. I'm not from Hawaii. I came in because of kind of like subject matter expertise in a few different areas, including kind of workers' rights. That brought me into the office. But I think that the best way that I would talk about the work that I've done here and how it relates back to the state that I help represent is like arts have been the best way for me to interact with the culture and the different creative culture that is only in Hawaii. So Native Hawaiian arts in every single form has been the best way for me to better understand the state and the people that I help to represent, especially given the fact that it's unique. No shade at Maine, but like we are, far from the mainland, and so it's just a different beast entirely. And so it's been great to work with everybody on kind of a variety of creative economy issues, given kind of the impact that they can have across the country.
Thank you both. Next question is for both of you. Evan, I'll start out with you, but what are some of the most important things that constituents should know or be prepared for when reaching out to Congress?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess I would just start by saying a member's most important job is being responsive to their districts and their constituents. So truly, like Jesse and I exist to hear from you and work with you on your priorities and what you're seeing and what you'd like our bosses to be supportive of. So, I know it can be a little bit intimidating sometimes to reach out to your member of Congress or your senators. But just know, look at us sitting here. We're not very intimidating. Promise when you pick up the phone or write an email, it'll be people like us who are reading sharing with the member, working on how to best respond to you and your concerns. So, so that'd be a piece of advice.
Thank you. Jesse, what are your thoughts?
No, I 100% agree with Evan. And, I would just say, like, one, don't underestimate the impact that it can have as well. I mean, the best example, Tushar was kind enough to mention one of Senator Schatz's bills, the CREATE Act. The reason that bill is bipartisan with Senator Cornyn is because the wonderful folks at Texans for the Arts reached out to Senator Cornyn's office and made it clear to them that, hey, there's a constituency in this state that that this cares about this. And that was a big help in finally getting him onto the bill. So don't underestimate that. And then two, frankly, just how helpful it is sometimes for us to get the outreach from people, because there are so many things going on the Hill at one time. It's easy for us to forget about something, not because we don't care about it, but just because like you come walk in the door every day and you get 15 different things thrown at you that you kind of have to play hot potato a little bit and just try to put out the fires as they come up. That getting that reminder of like, oh, hey, there's this, this appropriations ask that we have, or, Tushar is really good about reaching out and bumping up, little opportunities that are coming through in appropriations or in other vehicles. That's super helpful for me to say, right, okay, that's something that's coming up. Let's make sure to prioritize that. Let me make sure that I can delegate that to somebody else if I don't have the time. And so, it's frankly, I like hearing from people because it's helpful in making sure that I don't forget about anything, and I don't want to miss an opportunity to move the ball forward.
Thanks, Jesse. Evan, moving back to you. You and your boss play a great role in the appropriations process. How important is it for constituents to let their congressional offices know about their appropriations requests, and what are some of the best ways for an advocate to do so?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've got a couple appropriators on the call, so we're going to be biased and say it's definitely the most important committee. I'm going to build a little bit off of what Jesse was saying with the last question. So every spring, the appropriations committees on both sides start working on what the whole government funding, process is going to look like for the upcoming fiscal year. So that includes just about every federal agency, program, department you can think of. As you can imagine, we get hundreds of different requests. As we should, people have a lot of different priorities and interests. And you just want to make sure that your priorities are not kind of getting lost in the shuffle there. So I think it's super important to be reaching out because, again, like, it's definitely possible sometimes that a staffer might really care about NEA funding, but just it'll have slipped their mind. They'll have 10 other things on their to-do list. And it's just a nice reminder, especially if that's your number one priority and you're thinking about that all the time, to just loop us in and make sure that we're not, we haven't missed something that we want to be engaged with.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say most offices have some type of process. I mean, I can, we have a form online that people can put in requests on, and it goes into a spreadsheet that eventually gets to, all of the staffers who are handling the portfolio of issues. Some generally offices have some process where you can talk to them about it, or you can just reach out to us too. Like, we're not going to say, sorry, you have to go through the website. Usually we're happy to have a meeting, and it's helpful to follow up with that. And then the other piece that I'll mention too is, there's earmarks, right? Congressionally directed spending requests, which function a little bit differently on the Senate and the House sides, considering, Senate's controlled by the Dems and the House. Sorry, Evan.
Rubbing it in.
We'll reverse one day. But that's buckets of money out there that oftentimes can be used for arts programs, and sometimes we have to be a little smart and creative about how to get that money into arts groups, because there's not like a clear-cut account for that. Sometimes you can do it via workforce development stuff, sometimes education in the arts programs, sometimes it can be arts in public buildings, federal buildings type kind of asks. But that's a lot of money. It's there. We're going to try to use it. You put in those arts, for local nonprofit organizations. I can say for my boss, like, that's who he wants to give the money to. We're not looking to try to give another bunch of money to somebody who can go raise it someplace else. I want to give kind of like money to some cool, competent group that is going to be able to take this money and run with it. And maybe like otherwise wouldn't get that opportunity. So just also flagging that as like a really great way, to talk to us and look for opportunities there, because there's a bucket of money every single year that's sitting there and we want to spend it.
That's great, just very insightful stuff. But we have a question from one of our webinar participants. Do elected officials log the number of requests and see what the level of interest from their see what the level of interest is from their constituents, and how influential is that?
Sure. I mean, every office does things a little bit differently. So, can't say that, every office does it exactly how we do it. But I know I have a colleague who works on, they're called legislative correspondents. They work specifically on kind of managing incoming mail and making sure that my boss is aware of what's coming in and how she would like to respond. So that colleague sends out, reports every week about what we're seeing. So the whole office really knows, like, wow, we're hearing a lot of folks who are interested in issue A or issue B. And certainly as a legislative staffer who works on particular issues, I definitely hear numbers of folks who have written in or called in about a specific thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
rest assured. Go ahead.
just jumping off of that same thing here. I don't know if it's the case for every office, but for us, every week the senator gets a report on what's been coming in on the mail, and he sees the top thing, but he can also see how many people are writing in about what. And that goes to for us, we share it at a weekly meeting with all of our staff members, and so they will see there's 25 people that wrote in about one specific arts priority, NEA funding or something like that. That's going to be seen by the office, and kind of you can see how many people from the state are kind of cluing into that.
That's great. So you're saying rest assured that information is being collected from your constituents that are very influential in making those decisions. Final question. Obviously, students, particularly arts students, are vital to the arts community as well as arts advocacy. We have one asking, how can humanities and performing arts students become more involved in advocacy for the arts on our campuses and the arts in general? And how can we best utilize our unique perspectives and circumstances?
Yeah, I can start. Well, great question. I would say, first of all, we're always happy to hear from anyone who has kind of like a personal or lived experience with an issue that's a priority for them. So, I know that, we were just talking about our mail system earlier. I know that when folks write in or call in with personal stories, that can sometimes get a little bit of an extra flag for my boss, so that, she wants to read when people share things that are, personal and important to them. So, whether you're a student or otherwise, sometimes that can kind of put a little extra oomph on your note that you've sent into us. And I'd also say, being able to describe as a student what investment in the arts means to you and your future. I know, Jesse and his boss have done a lot of work on kind of arts workforce, so I'll let him take that. But, being able to say that, this federal investment means that I'll be able to find work in my chosen field, be a productive member of my community, and will help support my future, I think is a huge kind of argument when you're trying to make the case for more arts funding.
Yeah, and I mean, just again, jumping off of that, right? The correspondence, that's I think the quick and easy way, especially when kind of big opportunities are coming out. If there's an amendment going on to kill NEA funding, like, yeah, please write in because that's going to make a difference. But I think just sharing your experiences, like that in and enough is like that's enough in and of itself. I think hearing the challenges that you've faced and like your worries about I don't know how I'm gonna get to that next level or do that next thing once I graduate or whatever it is, that's super helpful. One of the other bills that my boss leads, the Place Act, with our wonderful companions in the Pingree office. I say that like every single time I talk to a new group of people in anywhere in the arts or creative economy community, I learn something else. And I learn another problem that needs to be solved in the federal government. The federal government is not set up well, and a lot of the grant programs are not set up well for arts and creative economy kind of, workers and businesses. And so like understanding what the pressure points are and then letting us with our weird legislative minds go back and try to fix those programs or talk to people at agencies and try to get them to tweak, eligibilities, things of that nature. Like you can kind of give us the inputs on what the problems are and the challenges you're facing are. It's our job to then take that back and say, okay, what are the points, what are the tools that I have in my bag to then go and try to fix that? And there usually is something, whether or not it has an immediate impact or whether it's going to take a while to happen, whether there's a political will behind it. That's something that, I can't even necessarily say with the bills that we have, but we can find, opportunities to try to move the ball forward. So just hearing about your experiences, your stories, and, what you're interested in doing, that gives us kind of the information that we need to then go to the next level.
Great. This has just been highly informative. I hope to our participants, but to me as well. Thank you so much for your time. Personally, thank you for all of the work that you do and our interactions together. You guys are just fantastic to work with, and I always feel the passion that you both have for public service. So thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Teacher.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Great. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jay Dick, who's going to talk a little bit about advocacy through 2024. Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Tushar. Welcome, everyone. Well, we've heard about the topics, the legislative topics. We just heard from some Hill staff. So now what can you be doing about it to make a difference? Next slide. So let's start. What is advocacy? Advocacy is simply telling your story. Why the arts matter to you and why it should matter to everyone else. Advocacy is about educating others about the arts. It is establishing working relationships with key decision makers, just like what we've heard about from the two Hill staffers we just talked about. Advocacy is being you. It's being your authentic self and showing others what you believe in by your words and action. But advocacy is not scary. And I hope by the end of this webinar, you will make sure that you realize it's not scary. Next slide, please. So why should we be advocating about the arts? Well, if elected officials and key decision makers do not hear from us, their constituents, they're going to assume something. They're going to assume that everything's okay. Nothing more is needed, no new funding, no new policies, or that no one cares about the arts. So you're the experts in the fields. You're the people that live the arts. If you don't take the time to talk to your elected officials, who will? Numbers matter. Every time you write to your member of Congress, make a phone call, see them in person, that makes a difference, and it truly does. And so we're thankful for you to being on this call. And when you're done with this call, going and getting 5 other people and get them to be an advocate too. Next slide, please. So there's lots of things you can do to be an advocate for the arts. You can do emails, letters, tweets. You can do virtual in-person meetings. You can attend town hall meetings and ask an arts question. You can establish a working relationship with elected officials or their staffs, because again, staff's very, very important. And you can become a resource to that elected official and their staffs when they have questions about the arts. So they see a new bill, like, how is this going to affect my local district here? They're going to call you up and say, hey, Tushar, what's going on here? And you have the opportunity. And you can also be part of a larger network of arts advocates, being a member of the Arts Action Fund, the Americans for the Arts alert something, and your own state arts advocacy organization. Next slide. This is a little bit of a screenshot from Americans for the Arts' website. We have a list of all the different statewide arts advocacy organizations that are in and around the country. Most every state has one. So I encourage you to go find your state arts advocacy organizations. You're actually going to hear from a couple in a couple minutes. If you're not already, sign up for their email list, become a member of them, and be an advocate at the state level too, because it's really important that we're all united together and we're advocating for the arts. Next slide, please. So what are some key principles of our advocacy? So advocacy, big or small, should be part of our daily mission. It's building these relationships. It is responding to advocacy alerts when after Americans for the Arts sends it to you, or your state arts organization sends it to you. It is if you have a newsletter or something like that, putting in a little note about being an arts advocate. It's things big or small, but just take a moment and say, hey, how can I, when doing X, Y, or Z task, add advocacy in part of this? Being successful depends on that unified message. That's why being part of Americans for the Arts, the Arts Action Fund, and your statewide arts advocacy organization is so important. Expand, your advocacy efforts, to build coalitions. So, hey, work with your chambers of commerce, your PTAs, or other nonprofits. Think about who else cares about the arts or the creative economy that's out there. Again, I've said this multiple times, get to know your elected officials and their staffs. Politicians, respond to constituents, lead with local stories and complement that with local data points. Stories and data and stories go so well to each other. Make sure you do that. And then lastly, again, be your authentic self. Your passion is really going to show and it will make a difference there. Next slide there. We live in a polarized world, but luckily the arts don't have to be polarizing, but we can unite. So it's not about, it's about policy. It's not about personality. It's not partisan. It's a local policy impacting local constituents. The arts, with the idea that the arts make communities better, that the arts help address other issues, veterans' health, education, economic growth, things along those lines. The understanding of what the elected official, make sure we understand that what elected officials care about and incorporate that into how we address these points. So go ahead and read the legislators' websites, look at their committee assignments, because that'll tell us what they care about, their newsletters, their social media. That all gives us clues what that elected official really cares about. And then we can talk about how the arts helps with that issue. And then lastly, never, ever, ever do anything to ask an elected official to do something that will get them unelected. So be thoughtful about our asks and how we work with stuff there. Next slide there. This is a slide, a screenshot from our website. Remember I talked about how the arts can help with other issues? So this is our Arts and Social Impact Explorer. This is a great tool for you to use to get information. Like if you find out your elected official really cares about health and wellness, you can go here, get some more information about how the arts and health and wellness authentically interacts with each other, or transportation or social justice. Lots of different ways to make sure and you get the arts out of those, because people have preconceived notions about what the arts are. Get them out of their preconceived notion and into a larger view of what the arts actually do. Now, there's about 30 different wedges on this wheel. Take a look at them, and I guarantee you'll find something on here your elected official really does care about. Next slide. I've said this before, and I'm going to really say it again because it's worth repeating. Your advocacy goal is to build ongoing professional relationships with your elected officials and their staff. But if you wait until you need help to build that relationship, you're too late. Do it now. Knowledge is power. It can become a resource or an expert on your issue areas. And then never assume to know what they're going to do or what their position is. Always ask them. Always take a moment and say, hey, do you support this? And listen to what they happen to say. They might kind of he and ha and try to go back and forth, but ask that question again and see what they'll do. And then get to know the staff again. Again, we just heard from staff. They're so knowledgeable. They know what's going on. and stay in regular contact with them. And if you do that, again, we're going to be so successful in advocating for the arts, whether it's on the federal, the state, or the local levels there. Next slide. So, okay, where to start? Well, the first thing is, who's our elected officials? So, there's 3 levels here. It's all constituent based. It is 1, can you vote for them? So are you a constituent? The second level is, your organization have a footprint in that in their district? Or 3, does the audiences or your organization maybe come from their district? And so that's kind of the levels there. But let's just talk about where you live there. So next slide there. So if you go again to Americans for the Arts, our voter voice site, in this case, this is the Arts Action Fund we're showing you here. If you hit the next slide there, so I can see some pop-ups, keep going a couple more times. You can see you'll find your legislators, another one. You see, find your officials there. Sorry, we did one too earlier. Pop in your zip code there. There you go. Then you hit connect, continue, and you're going to see next slide or next pop there. Representative Maria Salazar. So this is from Miami, for example. Here's a whole list of your elected officials. It tells you exactly who your elected officials are. It's from the president, your states, your federal senators, down to your state reps, your governor, stuff like that. We're going to focus on Representative Salazar. Next slide there. Hit it another couple times. Let's see your contacts. So we have your contact there. You can see you have a district office and a Capitol Hill office. Don't forget about the district office. That's so important. That's your local. So you don't have to spend money to come to DC. You can go and get to know them at the district staff there. And keep in mind, the member of Congress comes back to the district all the time. Make the meetings there. Get to know them there. That's a very powerful tool there. Notice also Facebook there and Twitter or X, whatever it is nowadays. So many members of Congress use social media, almost more than email. So social media, so follow them, tweet at them, and communicate with them that way. Invite them to your events or show them what you're doing. Lots of great things you can do on social media. You'll notice there on their email address, it says noemail@votervoice.net. For when you go to write to your member of Congress for like on a policy issue, I urge you to support HR 1515. They actually don't have a public email address for that. They have a web form. And I want to talk a little bit about a web form and how we can email them or get an email to them through that web form. But I'm going to do that here in a little bit. Next slide there. Staff. Again, we've already talked about why staff is so important. So you have Capitol Hill staff, hit a couple more times for some red buttons here. You have Capitol Hill staff and you have district staff. So again, really great things. Having a name is so important. So when you call up to say, I want to talk to the scheduler, to make a meeting, they'll say, oh, here, let me send you to their voicemail. But if you say, hey, can I talk to Catherine Gonzalez? Oh, they must know them. And then you have a much better chance of talking to the scheduler, Catherine, than if you just say, can I talk to the scheduler? So having a name is so important, even if you don't know them. It's so important there. So there's some names there, and that stays up pretty good. Next slide there. And then lastly, some committee assignments here. Again, this tells you what committees they sit on and how what policies they have a lot of authority over. Are they an appropriator? Do they sit on finance committee? Do they sit on an education committee? In this case, Representative Salazar sits on small business committee, so we know to talk to her about stuff along those lines. So it gives you an idea of what she will care about. Next slide. And sorry, there we go. One more and we'll go to the next slide. So how can I start? So we've identified our elected officials. So now let's start communicating. Again, you can send that email, and I'm going to tell you how to do that here in a second. Find that stamp. I have no idea how much a stamp costs nowadays, but you can do that stamp and send a letter. Make a phone call. That's always important. Invite them, meet with them, whether it's DC or the district, or host them. People don't think you can host them into your organization. Invite them to be part of what you're doing there. That's always a very powerful thing. Lots of things you can do there. Next slide. Okay, I talked about the web form there, the email. So this is our voter voice site. This connects you into their web form. So it looks like you're going to email them, but it goes to the web form. So you go in here, it has a pre-written message on here. In this case, it's about supporting the National Endowment for the Arts. Hit a couple more, one more. And you can see it has a pre-written message there, but it has an area for you to customize it. It's really important to customize the message because all the Hill offices have a little a system and it can read the emails and it will know what you're saying. But if you customize that email, it pops it out of the system. Someone has to actually look at it to see what you're talking about. So, and that's also where you tell your story. Because again, remember the Hill staff said that they love to hear the stories behind it. So this is the great way for that web form to be able to tell your personal story there. And again, this is something through Americans to the Arts that we do. Next slide, please. To schedule an in-person meeting, if you want to do that, this is simple. Pick up the phone, call the scheduler, like we said to do, and say, hey, I want to meet with you. I'm a constituent. I want to meet with you on these topics. But be flexible with the time and be mindful that their schedule is very packed too. And so you might take a couple weeks, but that's okay, and be ready to do that. But it's all okay. Next slide. During the meeting, be prepared. What's your 3 top topics? Don't go in and talk about 10 topics. Don't do it. 3 topics max. 1 or 2 is even better. If you have more than one person, schedule it out. I'll talk about this. You talk about this. So you have a plan of attack going on there. Be ready to explain why the arts matter, so it resonates with them. So you know they care about arts in the military. Or the military. So you're going to talk about arts in the military and how it helps with PTSD, things along those lines. And then you're going to bring background materials. And this is all stuff Americans to the Arts can help with. It's on our websites. And it's just, you print it off and you can hand it in and it's good. And then don't forget to take a photo and put it on social media and then send them a thank you note. That's all a good thing there. Next slide there. Follow-up is always important. So once you get done, you go, first off, like I said, you're going to send them a thank you note. Everyone likes to be thanked. Make sure you put that elected official on your organization's mailing list and invite them to things. They love to be invited. The elected officials love audiences. So invite them to your stuff. They love to be up there, especially in election years. Make sure, like I said, visit their district office and meet their staff to build that personal relationship and get that going on there. And then arrange for them to visit and learn about the arts and from some of your supporters around the district around the year, and then attend town hall meetings, as I said, and regular Zoom meetings. They a lot of times they have regular Zoom meetings too. You can do all of that. You're just building this relationship with your elected officials and their staffs, and so they know. You see you come down the hall and say, "Oh, there's Jay. He's the arts guy. I know what he wants," and that's great. And that's exactly what you want. Last slide. So finally. This was just a little taste of what you can be doing to advocate and make a difference about the arts. But I'm going to leave you with this. You can't spell the word bipartisan without the arts in there. We are not left, right, or center. We unite. Keep that in mind. It's very important. So thank you. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Nina for our next panel.
Thank you, Jay. That was a great presentation. And just to remind everyone, we're going to take your questions at the end of actually this panel. So stay tuned. But what we're going to do now is invite Manny Qualling, Adrian Jefferson, and Chris Riley to come on video and unmute yourselves so that we can have a panel discussion. First, let me do a little explanation about what Federal Advocacy State and District Captains are. This is a program that we began in 2023 at Americans for the Arts and the Arts Action Fund, where we first started by coming up with a target list of members of Congress that have an outsized influence on the legislative process, whether they are the chair of the Appropriations Committee, like Senator Murray of Washington State, or they are a key Republican to co-sponsor certain bills, or it could be like Adrian, whose member is Rosa DeLaura, who is the Democratic ranking member of the full Appropriations Committee on the House side. We first came up with that target list, and then we found the best arts advocates in the field, which you're seeing 3 of. But we have a total of probably over 65, where we are trying to develop an even closer relationship between constituents and their congressional members who have this outsized influence. And that means that we at times will bring these captains into Washington during key moments of time for them to lobby their members of Congress, or it means that they're doing something back home. They are also, and these are on top of their day jobs. They run state arts advocacy organizations, and they run local arts agencies in communities across the country. So with that as a background, Jesse Eilman, who was with Senator Schatz's office of Hawaii, did a shout out for Texans for the Arts, where Chris Riley is now the executive director as of November 1st. Chris, could you talk a little bit about how Texans for the Arts contacted Senator Cornyn, who is a Republican from Texas, to co-sponsor the CREATE Act? And he's also been very involved with the Fans First Act, but let's start with the CREATE Act.
Well,
Chris?
absolutely. It all goes back to what a lot of what's being said today, and that's relationship building. We spend years. I've been with Texans for the Arts for 7 years, but we've been building relationships, and not just with the senator himself, but also with his staff. So when we have these issues come up, really with the CREATE Act and also the SVOG, shuttered venue operating grants was a huge one. Having that relationship and being able to take our constituents to him with their issues and have him be ready to receive us was huge. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
And talk a little bit more granularly about what were some of the talking points that you used to say, doing something for the creative workforce in a bill called the CREATE bill is very important, and why he needs to be a lead sponsor with Senator Schatz on this bill?
Well, a big part of it for us was talking directly with his office about the fact that we are trying to grow our creative workforce here in Texas. We are a very pro-business state, and we're trying to grow not only our arts and creative industries, but particularly our film area. But what we have to do is we have to bring in a lot of the workforce for those projects, because we don't have that workforce inherently here in Texas. So that was where it started, is looking at it at a very local level. We appreciate the work that he's trying to do to develop our economic situation here in Texas, but we need to have the workforce to be able to support that. And part of that is by developing those creatives who can be based here and ready, willing, and able to work.
That's terrific and very inspiring, because as you mentioned, the shuttered venue operator grants, Senator Cornyn was the main co-sponsor along with Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota on that. That brought in $16 billion for the cultural industry during COVID to save cultural organizations. Can you talk a little bit about any kind of information that you've given back to his office about how specifically those grants helped the cultural community, and how perhaps he saw this as not only a big win to serving his state, but that this is an issue that keeps him politically safe in a Republican state?
Sure. I think that with Senator Cornyn, it was again having the community appreciate him by thanking him. I'm sorry, Nita, can you repeat the question? I was just realizing.
Talk about any information you gave back to his office that specified how the arts community was specifically saved in Texas as a result of what he did, and did that give him the political incentive to do more for the arts and cultural community, like the Fans First Act and now the CREATE Act?
Yeah, I think so. I think part of it too is what Jay had mentioned earlier, the importance of educating our lawmakers. I like to talk about the SVOG in the sense that when the PPP loans were coming out, those operating grants did not have, those loans didn't actually support the operating of the venues as well, because of the fact that the expense to operate those grants didn't meet some of the requirements of the PPP. So by educating Senator Cornyn about that and bringing that information to him, that's how it evolved him coming to the place where he was the one quoting first to close, last to reopen. having Senator Cornyn say that was a huge win for us and ultimately led to that. So bringing that information to him was pivotal.
And in both of your examples, what I would like to highlight to the audience is that you identify a problem with specificity and you talk about a policy solution within the legislation that is a direct address to the problem. And that's a really effective way to do advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to now move on to your colleague Manny with the state arts advocacy organization called Inspire Washington. Manny has flown in for our fly-ins last year. He has one of the most important senators in Congress, Senator Patty Murray, who is the chair of the Appropriations Committee. But what I'm going to ask Manny to talk about is how he used his advocacy skills to win a big victory in the state and how it's impacting King County.
Certainly. Thank you, Nina. And hello, everyone. Yes, I'm Manny Kowalin. I'm the executive director for Inspire Washington. We are our state's cultural advocacy organization dedicated to cultural equity and opening doors to science, heritage, and the arts. You know, we really see all of this as one big picture. It isn't just federal, it isn't just state, and it isn't just local. They all interact with each other. Those federal dollars are critical here in Washington state because, of course, it really serves as the base funding for our state arts agency. However, the state of Washington, talking about some of our unique challenges, we have really regressive tax policy here. We don't have an income tax. So therefore, over 70% of our state budget goes to education, which means when they're matching those federal dollars, they have limited resources. So that local funding in cities and in counties across Washington is really, really, really critical. So to answer Nina's question, you know, kind of explaining how the federal dollars work and how it interacts with our limited state resources is an important way of really demonstrating to local leaders, to mayors and to county council members that they're not off the hook, that we need those dollars. In fact, here in Washington state, local funding is really how we pay for many things, mental health, a whole bunch of issues. So that's how we turn that argument around. We were inspired nearly over 20 years ago by the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District of Colorado, the RAP tax in Utah, to really look at a local sales tax to create a cultural fund. In 2015, our state legislature, after, gosh, over a decade of advocacy, created that taxing authority, providing local communities, cities or counties to adopt a local cultural tax, but it required a public vote. And we lost on the ballot in 2017. There were problems with the underlying legislation, and we corrected them in our state government, and we plan to be back on the ballot in 2020. But then the pandemic hit, and we didn't have the opportunity, of course, with all of the competing issues, to go back on a public vote. But we found another way in. We got our legislature to expand authorizing options to include councilmanic authority, where we could actually institute a public cultural tax without a public vote. It's an option, it's not a requirement. And this last year, we were able to win the support, the unanimous support of our King County Council. King County represents 39 cities and towns in Washington, including Seattle, and they approved the adoption of a new expanded sales tax, 1/10 of 1%, 10 cents for every $100 spent. But in our populated county, there's a lot of households. It's $40 per household, but it amounts to, in a full tax collection year, of about $100 million a year. I know. So it's a 7-year authorization. So we have secured a minimum. Conservative tax projections tell us that we have secured at least $784 million to address cultural equity and to drive more access for 39 cities and towns in King County. That means that we will be moving the needle. King County has formally funded arts and cultural programs through collection of a lodging tax. That means that we have moved the needle from $5 per capita to about a little over $50 per capita. In the final year of authorization, the taxes collected will be about $126 million. And there's a lot of buckets in there for different things. They're all really, really good things. But I guess my point is saying is that you don't focus on one part of the story and get what you need. You really talk about the whole thing and you court them and bring them along. And everything Jay said, we accomplished this because we had relationships, we had found shared objectives. We were able to really address need. We were able to talk about the intersections, about why this affects tourism and hospitality business and all other, and why job creation is important. And all of that came together for, even we couldn't believe it, the unanimous support of our county council. We were hoping for at least the majority to get it across the finish line, but we really, we got them all.
And King County is Seattle. It includes Seattle, right?
Yep, it's Seattle.
Most
yes.
populous county maybe in the state?
Yes, King County is home to 2.3 million Washingtonians, just a little bit under a third of our state population.
And did you find, first of all, congratulations. It's really impressive.
Thank you.
Did you find that your federal legislators were also interested in what was happening, and did they take notice?
Absolutely. They've been really, really supportive. I mean, again, they too understand that it's kind of like all of this together ensures that the communities that elect them have high quality of life, right? It is about, it's about the federal support. They know that we're not letting them off the hook from congressional appropriation. It's still important.
It shows them that their constituents care about this.
Absolutely.
Of $126 million.
And their local partners. I mean, the King County council members elected by the same people that elected them are also believe that this is a priority.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that story. There might be questions after our panel, but
Sure.
I want to go to Adrian for next. Adrian, you're with the City of New Haven, a municipal government agency for the Department of Cultural Affairs. And your city recently participated in the Arts and Economic Prosperity Study 6, which is the big national economic impact of the arts and culture. Can you tell us, what did you do with those research results? Who did you talk to about it? What are you trying to get from it?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. It's so wonderful to be here with both Chris and Manny. So for us, the Arts and Economic Impact Study came at the right time because we just recently, 2 years ago, released a cultural equity plan. And the cultural equity plan was the first of its kind in the city of New Haven and actually in the state of Connecticut, in which we're talking about why everyone has the right to have access to the arts, but specifically those who have been historically marginalized and don't have the same opportunities as their counterparts. And so while we released a lot of anecdotal information, stories from the community, and it's really important to note that the cultural equity plan actually was developed by the residents themselves. So it kind of was the story of the community telling its own story, advocating for themselves, while the city playing the role of just giving it the platform. And so we have this major document now that essentially is arts policy locally and is being used in a variety of different assets outside of the arts. But people still want to know, is it really working, right? What is the actual impact when you are saying you're going to be behind social justice initiatives? A lot of times there's this thought, even if it's not spoken, that you're going to lose money economically, right? And so what I feel like the AEP study was able to do was prove that our numbers actually are staying right where they were or are growing economically. And so you don't lose money by investing in Black and Brown community and other marginalized community. And so the report came at a time where maybe some people weren't understanding just the story. They really wanted to see the data. Because some people, I feel like when you can't get through to people with the story, data is where they speak. And so data doesn't usually lie. And so we were able to show that the economic impact that was coming into the city actually had grown even since before the pandemic and throughout it, and that we didn't have to compromise with who we were serving and how we were serving them. So that was like really great information. And the fact that this year, after y'all really were able to say, this is not just an economic study, but this is a social impact study. It actually really helped, again, our argument of showing the social impact of things, particularly with that number, which was showing Black, Indigenous, people of color and the amounts that they spend, literally dollar for dollar, compared to, again, their counterparts. And we saw that there's not much of a difference, maybe a few cents, right? And so we were able to immediately use this to continue to advocate for cultural equity and systemic change in the arts and a platform for arts and anti-racism. So great news for us. We released it through a press conference with partners. We have a lot of different local partners, some who are legacy-based institutions, some who are community-based institutions, and some who are artists who were just kind of advocating for buying local, the importance of spending that dollar here in the city of New Haven and how it stretches into making sure that we are having a really cultural vitality experience here in the city of New Haven. And so when we released it, we were able to do this in connection with the holidays. And it actually was like, hey, if you're gonna buy a gift, why not support here locally? You know, buy in New Haven. We had an artist, Quadro Day, who came and spoke about his artwork, where you can purchase his artwork, but also talking about his academy and how you can purchase a workshop and instruction, you know, for if you want to learn how to create in the arts. So there was a variety of different things that we have done in order to push the plan. And what we're doing now is we're using the AEP6 study as an advocacy tool for our constituents to show how you can now go ahead into, whether it's local, whether it's statewide or federal, you can now use this to be able to, again, share your story or add to your story and give it a little bit more of an when you hit them with a real hard hitting, you know, story, but also with that data.
Yeah, this brings to real light the point that Jay was making in his presentation. Putting data and stories together is an unbeatable advocacy strategy in moving the needle. It just simply works every time. Very authentic stories with hardcore data that's irrefutable. Thank you for sharing these stories. I'd like you to stay on for our open Q&A session, and I'd like to invite the remaining speakers to unmute and come on video as we take questions. So Jay, I'm going to begin with you and asking you to read out some of the questions that we might be able to answer today.
Oh my gosh, we have been having so many questions. We've been typing away here, so we don't have a lot of time. So let me just start out with one here. How do you make any progress with legislators who think the arts are a waste of money?
I can speak to that a little bit. So Texas is a very fiscally conservative state. And so making sure that we use things like the AEP6, the best way to arm yourself is to bring the data in to refute that argument. We do a state of the arts report, or well, we don't, but our partner, the Texas Cultural Trust, does a state of the arts report. And it's pretty hard to refute that if we generate $380 million in tax revenue through the creative industries, that it's not a good investment. And we have a very modest state agency as far as our per capita investment in the arts in Texas compared to other places. And we're generating those resources. So when you can bring that data to them, I think it's just kind of a myth that the things like the AEP6 study really help us to demystify this idea that the arts are not a good investment, because the opposite is in fact true.
Excellent. Next question, Adrian, we have a question directed towards you. How do you educate local leaders who may not be particularly data literate? How do you package or discuss data in an accessible way?
Well, that's a great question. I would say the first thing is not to overthink it. A lot of times we are over strategizing, and it's something important that you touched on, Jay, which is advocacy is not scary. I love that, because it doesn't have to be scary. It's something we do every day in our jobs when we're advocating for more money in our, in our departments or for our organization. It's just essentially something that we do. And so what I find is if you bring data in a way that is digestible, that works better. And there's a number of different ways in which we can do this, right? And to me, that's like a whole training that we can get into. But I do think if we're able to have like we do a lot of like roundtable discussions and a lot of one-on-one coaching up of ways in which it's best to, obviously my theme is like tell your story. And in the midst of that, you're looping in the data. So it's not just data heavy, because I'm going to tell you, I was a person who actually used to be afraid of the data. The economics scared me. I'm like, I don't do that. I'm a programming person. But then I realized that your story can be stronger when you have the data and you can incorporate it in different ways that doesn't make it super data heavy. So again, but as far as coaching people up, roundtable conversations, social media is a great way to introduce data through even like fun videos. And again, making the information digestible.
Perfect. Manny, I think this one's for you coming up, because basically what you just done out in Washington. Can you share some strategies for coalition building so groups with similar goals can advocate together? I know you are a big coalition builder out in King County and in Washington State.
Absolutely. There's a lot of different ways I could answer that question. I mean, thinking specifically about state work, we convene a big table, a really big tent, let's say, for our state legislative sessions. So we spend, a lot of time building relationship with leaders like Karen Hannon, the director of our state arts agency, or Jennifer Kilmer, the director of our Washington State Historical Society, partners like that. And then we convene all of them to really to start sharing what everyone's unique objectives are during the state session. And we try to find like where, we have lots of conversations so we all understand them and understand what is powerful about that for their unique organization, but also what the wide rippling effects will be. And then we recruit advocates from all across the state around that big, broad agenda. So we're, the bottom line is I'm not in each meeting with each lawmaker, and I'm not sitting there saying, no, focus more on the arts or more on the history. It's like we just share all of it, and we really encourage all of them to find things that are meaningful to them to share. So coalition building really starts with bringing all the leaders to the table and then making the connections for all the advocates on the ground to find things that they care about.
We're almost out of time. We just got one here to clarify. Can you give some examples of advocating for initiatives that might get an official unelected? I said that, so I'll quickly do the answer there. So you go to a state elected official and say, I want you to spend $3 million for a new piece of public art on the courthouse square in the middle of really rural Texas. That's something that's probably not going to work out terribly well. And the legislator, once he stops laughing about wanting to spend $3 million on a piece of public art in the courthouse in rural Texas, will say, get out. So you have to be thoughtful about what you are asking them for. Like, for example, we would like $1 billion for the National Endowment for the Arts. We do not ask for $1 billion for the National Endowment for the Arts because it's not a reasonable request. We have to go up in steps, and stuff like that. So that's a couple examples. Nina, I don't know if you have anything you want to add there. And I think at this point, I'll just probably turn it back over to you because we are almost out of time.
Okay, thank you, Jay, for those questions. I think you have to work with who your champions are in the legislature to discuss with them what is the reasonable ask. And we do this every year. We work with the same congressional staff that you saw speaking today to talk about what our asks, but we also bring that together with what the needs of the community are, because that's what they need to hear from us, not a wish list, but what the needs of the arts community are. And for us, we think it should be at $1 per capita. So maybe not $1 billion, but around 335 million, depending on the population at any one moment. And I'm going to just ask one question because we just have one more minute before we have to go to the next slide. And that is, Manny, for you, since you did do a lot of work with your city council members and stuff like that, how important is not only the message and the data, but the messenger who delivers the ask?
Oh gosh, it's everything. Everything. I mean, like I get frequently when we're trying to set up a meeting, when there's a vote we're in pursuit of, right? I mean, the conversations we have about who should be that person, where do they live, What do they do? Does anyone know them? I mean, all of that. I mean, the bottom line is we understand this as humans. There are certain people that my ears open wider for when they talk to me. Figure out who that person is that will really resonate with the decision maker.
Yeah. Thank you all to all of you. And if we could go to the next slide to say what you at home now can do in the next 30 days before we have our Advocacy 201 webinar or our earmarks webinar. So some of this is pulling from Jay's talking points and Tushar's talking points and some of our panelists. One, identify your congressional members and their district office locations, key staff, and websites. Jay gave you the URL to our voter voice to be able to find that. Two, I'd love for you to join their mailing lists for newsletters and events for your member of Congress. On their website, there is going to be a section where you can sign up to stay apprised of events and things happening, town hall meetings, phone call meetings, things like that. Three, read through that website. That website is talking about what that member of Congress has as a priority, what they're proud of achieving, what they want to achieve, what committee assignments they're on, and what they're working on. And your job then is to find a connection between the arts and those issues. Number four is find your member of Congress's social media handles, also through Voter Voice that Jay showed you. And I'd love for you to follow them so that you can continue to stay up to date on what they care about, like what they're saying, respond what they're saying, things like that. And then something that you can do to take action on federal legislation is we currently have on our Voter Voice site a campaign for you to send an easy email that you can customize to your congressional delegation, to senators and House member based on the current FY24 appropriations. Later on in the spring, we'll have one for FY25, but right now, FY24 is not done. Let's get it over the finishing line in March. And number six is, as an organization yourselves, you can endorse a federal bill that's been put forward by Congresswoman Fernandez and Abernolty of California to help invest in the creative workforce through the Department of Labor. Read about the bill. Tushar gave you the link, and this Google form is where you can add your organization's name along with hundreds of other arts organizations across the country. The idea is Congresswoman Fernandez wants to be able to show other members of Congress that constituents in their districts care about this issue. It's a very smart strategy, and it's a good opportunity for you to do something immediately. And then finally, as a reminder, we're going to be sending out the registration links soon for the Congressional Earmarks webinar that we'll be doing on February 9th. Now, for the next slide, the one you've been waiting for is where you can find all the slides that were talked about today. And they are on that first link above, artsactionfund.org, advocating-arts-2024. All of these slides are there. And also the video for today's presentation will probably be up there by this Thursday. So give us a couple days to be able to get that, but it will also be on the landing page. Finally, we're probably also going to put together an FAQ. I saw there were about almost 50 questions asked, so we'll probably put some FAQ together. But if you had a question that you think of later or didn't get answered and you want to get it answered sooner, please email our public policy coordinator, Olivia Tarpley, at the email address so you have someone to immediately contact if you want to get a faster answer. And with that, I want to thank everyone for participating today and look forward to seeing you all register for upcoming webinars. Have a great day.